morning. We're ready. 3, 2, get the stream going, carry the 2. All right, good morning, welcome. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Troy Jessup. I go by Jupiter. You can find me on Twitter at St. Jupiter, or I also, when it's not SAINTCON time, I run the SAINTCON Twitter feed as well. But during the conference, we delegate that out to more responsible individuals and stuff. I'll be really brief because many of you probably have already... This will bug me if this radio stays on. So a little bit about me. I'm a security professional. My day job is working at the Utah Education and Telehealth Network. I run the SAINTCON conference. I'm kind of the head chairman of the SAINTCON Planning Conference Committee. I founded it many years ago and such. I'm also in charge of the Utah Saint organization, and I'm deeply involved in the network security, cybersecurity community here in the state of Utah and beyond. I mean, we get to mingle with all sorts of great people throughout the world even. I love to do pen testing. That's the most favorite thing that I do in my job. All of the clerical and paperwork things pale in comparison to being able to break into people's stuff. And I'm paranoid. I am a paranoid security geek in all fashions. The disclaimer for this talk, I always put one up. These findings are not reflective of any one institution, but we are going to be talking about Granite School District a lot today. I only say that because Quinn's right there, and he's now going to be nervous, like, oh no. They're not reflective of any one institution, but they illustrate common themes and findings across the majority of organizations that we've tested. So let me give you a little bit of preamble about what we're talking about here today. So we've been doing penetration testing as part of the Utah Education Network on all sorts of state, government, and education entities. We've done pen tests on probably 30 different institutions throughout the last number of years. And there's common themes that we're finding. And so hopefully the majority of the people in here are in that education or state government state. If you're not, that's fine. These are going to be probably relevant to a lot of other things. And there's going to be some common themes that many cybersecurity folks are familiar with. But I've got this top 12, we'll call it top 10, whatever it ends up being, common findings that we have from penetration tests. Okay, first one, and these are in no specific or particular order, but I'll maybe editorialize with a story or so for each one. System patch management. When we're out doing penetration testing, system patch management is the well, I said I wouldn't rank them. It's the #1 way that we get into a lot of different systems. If a system isn't patched and there's a vulnerability, it makes it extremely simple for us to gain access to that system. Those of you that are familiar with the NSA exploits, disclosure leaks it's been about a year or so ago now, maybe a little more than that, where like the Eternal Blue exploit and some of these other ones were released. We use those things on a very consistent basis to get into systems inside of critical assets and infrastructure. So managing patches within your enterprise is critical. If you don't have somebody assigned to that task, or if it's not occurring on a regular and consistent basis, your systems and networks are vulnerable to hackers, okay? And the thing is most of the exploits that allow people to gain access to systems and services these days are extremely easy to use. In the security community, we talk about the word script kiddie. What that essentially means, if you're not familiar with the term, is somebody that doesn't know how to do what they're doing from a technological standpoint, but they can click the button on the screen that says launch and put an IP address in there and just click it. And we call those script kiddies. They use an exploit that somebody's programmed together and they can at least direct it off. Some of these exploits, when the system isn't patched, is just as easy as downloading this Hack the Planet app, put it on your computer, press the launch button. And it's effective because of this problem. Next thing we'll talk about. Logging and monitoring of systems and services. Organizations that we've pen tested very consistently have a significant lack of efficient logging and monitoring. And what this ultimately leads to is that an organization has all of these different computers, systems, and other things on the network that might log locally to the machine. So when somebody logs in, it might say, hey, Bob logged into the machine, but that log is only stored on that machine. There's no centralized logging or monitoring. And so what happens, and the scary thing about this is that when a compromise occurs on a network, it's very likely that it won't even be discovered or found, that you won't even know about it because there's not an alert that pops up that says, hey, the domain admin logged into the computer at 2:30 this morning. And that's kind of when the domain admin normally sleeps. And so those types of alerts and logs are crucial for defending your networks. And those aren't occurring in a lot of places. Okay, so we're blind to most of those threats. Okay, we talked about a number one before. I won't necessarily rate this one, but this is your new number one. So if you wrote it down with a number one in front of it on your notes, now cross that out, and you can rank that one later. This is your new number one. And we might do this again, so you might not want to write numbers next to them. Network segmentation. So let me tell you, when there are other vulnerabilities on a network, a properly segmented network is essential. And let me just kind of tell you what we're sort of talking about. It's the existence of, let me just probe the room here. How many of you guys have some critical data store that you have on your network? Whether it's student information, whether it's HR information and things, a lot of us do. How many of you guys have those servers that are sitting on the same network as the administrative staff or in user space? And it's for convenience so that they can access that information, but there's no firewall or security control between those two networks. And if I just went all wild technical and you don't know what I'm talking about, it's still a critical and important thing to understand that you have got to segment and separate the different parts of your network that have different roles. So if you've got a database server full of all of your personal data and information, you need to have it segmented so that there's a security buffer or zone. We call them security controls. There's a security control in place so that users can't necessarily access that data unless they meet the criteria. It's the administrative assistant or it's the HR director, and we poke holes through those firewalls so those people can access the data over here without opening it up to everything, okay? And so when we're talking about personal information and data stores, that's one thing, but we're talking about when we go out and do pen tests, we find that networks are very often flat, meaning that there's no, once you get in, so let me editorialize what that is a little bit more, is that we've learned very well that when we're connected to this thing called the internet, that we need to have a firewall. And that firewall will very traditionally sit out at the border. It protects us from all of those bad people out on the internet thing. But on the inside of our network, we don't add additional firewalls very often, or maybe some of you do, but we don't see network firewalls on the inside of the network segmenting these internal networks, which leads to, once we compromise one machine on the inside of a network, we can use it as a foothold and compromise everything else often. Does that make sense? Anybody confused with what we're doing? Okay, next thing, not a new number one, this is probably a good number three if I were to throw it out there. Vulnerability scanning. When we're out doing pen tests and doing things, we often find that vulnerability scanning, or looking for the holes, the problems, the threats that are out there, those are not occurring. Or if they are, they're very infrequent or inconsistent. And so without that, a lot of vulnerabilities aren't being detected. And so when we come on site and we do a pen test, one of the very first things that we'll do is a vulnerability scan. We'll scan everything. And we'll look for vulnerabilities, and we find a lot still when we're doing pen tests. And so if you're not doing vulnerability scanning on a regular and consistent basis, you're going to run into this problem over and over again. So vulnerability scanning. We're 9 minutes in already. That's crazy. Next thing, we'll rate this one at maybe a number 7 or so. System hardening. Okay, so IT people, how many are the IT geeks of your organization? and such. You're responsible for configuring the computers and the servers and those types of things. You can admit it. Your bosses might be in the room, but you know. Here's another critical piece, is we are often, as IT geeks, we're very lazy. And it's okay, we can admit it. We sleep weird hours, we drink a lot of caffeinated beverages, and you know, we look like we're angry all of the time, or whatever. But we're really lazy at a couple of things. We like to automate things. How many of you guys have good automation scripts out there? Okay, yeah, you push a button and it just, yeah, look at this, you know, and it goes out and deploys all this stuff. But we suck at this. System hardening. This is where you take a system and a service, and when you put it and install it on the network, that you go through all of the extra steps that you don't even know exist, because this is a new product, a new piece of software, it's this new operating system, or this new service, whatever it is, that you've got to actually take the time to learn so that you can properly secure it. And so we suck at this because we just like to press the button to deploy the new VMware instance, install the server, and bing, we're done. Look how easy that was. And so we don't apply all of the proper protections. We don't block all of the important ports and things like that for access to these systems, but we're also not making sure that they're all the way up to date with these different patches, that we turn off unnecessary services. I mean, how many of you guys have a server that would have, like a domain admin server that's also running, like, I don't know, I'll pull something out of the blue, like DNS. Well, DNS is bad because an AD runs that already, but that runs some other service, an FTP server or a web server or something else. And so you're mixing these types of things, and they can kind of contradict each other. And so system hardening is an extremely important concept to make sure that you're doing. Next on the list, when we're out doing penetration tests, we often find data in places where it shouldn't be. And so the classification and handling of data is not occurring the way that we would expect. And what this ultimately means is you've got some secretary, we kind of call out the secretary sometimes. For all the secretaries in the room, you know, it's nothing personal, but we have a secretary whose responsibility it is to do the mail merge, to send out the board meeting notes or whatever, but that mail merge just happens to come from the HR database, which includes all of the fields like social security number and birth date and all those things, and it's sitting on a desktop to make the mail merge easy. Is that familiar with anybody? Probably seen that happen. Okay. That data is outside of what we call its restricted element. It's outside of its place where it needs to be. And so as a result, that data can be easily compromised if the secretary, and again, we're calling out secretaries here, but if that person goes out and clicks on a bad link and gives remote access to their computer to somebody, that data is now in the wind, essentially. So proper data classification, and what that really means is you need to know where your data is, you need to know what kind of data it is, you need to know how it's stored, have processes and procedures for who can access it, and when they do access it, what data is allowed to be accessed. So to use this ongoing theme with the secretary and a mail merge, it might be completely appropriate for the secretary to get a dump out of the database, which includes a first name and a last name and an address, city, state, and zip. But that data collection shouldn't also include all of the other things. And there should be processes and procedures wrapped around how that's handled. How many of you guys have a data classification policy out there? I'm going to hold my hand up so I can see you guys now. Okay, so a few of you. Those of you that don't, this is an important and critical element, especially when you have critical and sensitive information out there. So, not to beat it up, we'll move along. Okay, next thing. This might be a little higher up the list. I'm going to stop numbering them really now. Security strategic planning. What we often find is that security is this haphazard, sort of implemented, we kind of know what we're doing, and we're pushing the cart forward in this way, and we're doing some stuff over here, but there's not a specific plan in place for things. And so it's really easy. You can walk into an organization and within 5 to 10 minutes define or figure out whether there's a security strategic plan in place. But let me talk about, for those of you that are kind of wondering, okay, well, you just kind of magically come up with that plan, how does it work? Let me talk about security frameworks just for a minute. And I might have a slide for this in a minute, but maybe if I don't, then we'll cover it here. But a security framework, there's plenty of available security frameworks, which is kind of a list of, think of it as a big checklist of things that you should be doing in your organization. One of my absolute favorites is the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls. And so if you've been to one of my talks before, we talk about this at SAINTCON all of the time. You need to have a framework. You need to have a scorecard that you can kind of go down the list and say, are we doing this? And are we doing it to this level? And is it effective? And go down and do it in a manner that is the most important things start at the top and we start working all the way down to the things that really don't matter as much. One of the first things that's on the CIS Critical Controls Framework is having an inventory of all of the software and services that exist on your network. How many of you guys have that inventory? How many of you guys know every single software and service that is on your network at any given time? Okay, so there's a few hands. That's incredibly awesome. It's hard to do. The second thing is knowing every piece of hardware that's on your network, including the refrigerator that's down the hall in the break room, and knowing that it has its own little module of internet access and things. But understanding all of those things and then being able to start wrapping security controls around them. Sorry, I've got my little paranoid thing popping up here that I need to clear. But a security framework, if you don't have one, go look at the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls. If you type that into Google, you'll see it. It's really easy, it's lightweight, it's something to get you started. Okay, next thing that we find, local administrator accounts. This is the bane of the IT world's existence. Okay, how many of you guys have all of these different people throughout your organization that they have to have a local admin account on their computer? Okay, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Somebody tell me. Does anybody know? What's that? They're admins. They can install things on their computers. What is the most, what is a very current and critical threat that happens to people with local administrative access? Maybe that's a really bad setup for a question. What's that? Crypto hijacking or ransomware. How many of you guys have been hit with ransomware? You might not want to raise your hand with that, but loud and proud if you are, like, you know. Ransomware. If you're a local admin on a machine, you can install all of the miscreant things that are out there if you somehow tricked into doing those. So local administrative accounts, we love them because they're really easy to compromise on a network. Couple of recommendations. And for you IT folks in the room, I want you to perk up and listen to at least this part as well. You guys also are the problem. And I'll pause there for dramatic effect. You guys are also the problem. I want to see loud and proud, and it's okay to be honest on this, but how many of you guys, when you log in with your normal standard user that you're browsing the web, sending emails back and forth and everything else, have domain administrative privileges? Okay, there's at least one hand that's willing to admit it. I'll give you, okay, 2. If we stay below 5, I might give you coins for at least admitting the fact that that's the case. But it's terrible. The types of access that we as IT folks have is staggering. I mean, we block all the HR directors, we block all of these administrative people from, and they only have access to these things, and we as IT administrators we have it all, you know. We have access to the databases, and we have access to the web servers, and man, I could change that thing right now. Convenient and helpful, and it makes you effective. But if you're using your daily use account as an administrative account, it's a terrible idea. The reason why is because when we do penetration tests, guess who we're targeting? We are targeting IT. We know that the IT administrators more than likely have administrative access with their default user accounts. And there's so many ways for us to grab that information and capture it. So we capture passwords, whether it's in transit, whether it's pulling them out of the password database on the machine, etc. It's easy for us to find those credentials, and if they're administrative privileges, we own everything. So let me tell you what you should be doing. And we're going to spend this much time on it because I think it's that important. You as IT administrator should no longer give yourself domain administrative privileges for your day-to-day account use. Number one, in the industry, we should be eating our own dog food. Does everybody know what that means? Like if we restrict users to have to go through all these different points of pain to do their functions, we should be doing some of the exact same things because we are not immune as security professionals or IT professionals from the phishing attacks, from the malware injection attacks, from the navigate to this weird web page accidentally that has JavaScript code on it that installs some downloader and then turns your machine into something you don't want it to be. We're not immune. And so what you should be doing is, for your day-to-day use accounts, it needs to be a normal user account with normal user privileges. And that when you're doing the administrative level privilege things, you escalate, you do those things, and then you de-escalate your privileges. And you do those very specifically. The passwords are different. Two-factor authentication is strongly recommended for your domain administrative privilege accounts. Because without it, we are still one of our big offenders. We get into so many networks through IT admin passwords that, let's just say we get into them all, almost. So, okay, a couple of other things, and we'll rush through the rest since we got only a few minutes left. Security and system administrative staff. What we often find as well is that security staff are sometimes and often non-existent. We have good IT staff, and the IT staff, frankly, often do a pretty good job of keeping things secure. But we have to understand a critical component to, we'll just call it physics. You know the oil and water thing don't mix, right? Neither does security and IT administration. Does anybody know why? The goals are different. Now, we like to do things in the same realm. We do a lot of things in the same realm. Where we as IT administrators like to do security things, and security people like to do IT things. But the roles are different. What are the two different roles? Does somebody want to take a guess, or do you know? I didn't know who that was in the back, but. Correct. That's a perfect nutshell response. So we, as IT administrators, we're there to fix the problem and give the access and make the problem go away, and that's our goal. As security administrators, we have this little bit more authoritarian role, which is we don't want you to access anything unless we want you to. And the goals are a little bit different. And so one of the things that we see a lot of the time is that the IT staff is primarily and wholly in charge of network security, and as a result, we often see the needle swinging toward the grant access side, and more so than is necessary or appropriate for the type of organization, institution, data stores, classification of data, and other things would normally dictate. And so having somebody, even if it's just defining the role and saying, hey, listen, IT guy, you are also the security guy. And you need to be working on the security structure of things and erring on that side a little bit. Let's move the needle at least back to the middle, and if nothing else, let's tick it a little bit more to the security side. And so without that person in place, you don't have that advocate. You don't have somebody thinking, hey, I've got to do this a little bit differently. We need to think about how we're segmenting our network. A lot of the problems we've talked about up to this point come because it's just convenient for us to do it the way that we've always done it. Next couple of things, password reuse and password length, okay? Lack of diversity in password use is a big problem. How many of you guys have the same password on multiple systems? It's okay to admit it. Some people are like this. We hate passwords. Even IT guys hate passwords, even though we're used to memorizing long strings of characters and numbers and things. But because we have to memorize all these different passwords, we often reuse them. How many of you guys have the same banking password as you do for something else you have on the internet? Hopefully the answer is no. Nobody's going to raise your hand. Probably wouldn't want to admit that one either. But having a diverse password for different sites, different services is critical, because when we're out pen testing and we find that one person's password, guess where it works? Everywhere. And it's very rare. I mean, we do see from time to time that, hey, no, that password doesn't work on that other system. But oftentimes, that same password works on system after system after system. And then what we also see is we see multiple user accounts. How many of you guys have one domain admin credential and it's shared between all of these different people? That's a terrible idea in a lot of different ways. Let's talk a little bit about password length as well. Password length is and complexity is no longer sufficient. Password length at this point, to keep up with the password cracking technology that's out there, you need to have 25 and 30 character passwords. Just to give you a little understanding there, with the password cracking rig that we have consumerly available for our pen tests, we can crack passwords that are 12 characters in length, and we can try every possible permutation of a 12 character password in under a day or two. I mean, I can give you more, it depends on a lot of things, but let's just say a day or two for simplicity's sake. That's easy for us to do. Any possible password that you could make out of 12 characters or less, we can crack that password in a short period of time. And so password technology, or just using a password by itself, is no longer enough. And so you'll see that Facebook and Google and all these other common organizations have implemented what? Two-factor authentication. If you're not using two-factor authentication for the majority of your user services, you seriously need to look into that. Two-factor authentication is becoming critical. Now, there's a lot of advocates for it, and there's a lot of naysayers. It's like, okay, it's just the fad. It's the middle ground to some sort of identity provisioning system or service that we might be getting to later on. And that might be true, and we can stand out in the hall, we can argue about it, but what I'm saying is you can't just rely on the password while we're waiting for something better than two-factor. And so two-factor is the recommendation. There's a bunch of different ways to effectively implement it, and it's something that we should be focusing on. Okay, last few things. Social engineering and phishing attacks, they're still effective. I don't know how you patch the user. Does anybody have any good ideas of how you patch people? You know, Brain OS 2.0 or something? Okay, but the thing is, security awareness training is absolutely effective. You want to know how to get people to stop clicking on emails? You run a phishing scam and you let them know, hey, guess what? 30% of the organization clicked on this email. And so some of it's effective, but some of it's scare tactic. What I also like is what the Utah State University folks did for a while, and that they encouraged people to not click on things, but to report phishing scams so they could pull them out of all of the emails and things like that by just giving them a $5 gift card over to the Aggie ice cream place. What I want to stress here is it is critical and important as administrators, executives, and IT professionals that we do not make clicking on a bad link a punitive thing. Okay, there shouldn't be a punishment associated with it. There shouldn't be a your job's at risk punishment kind of thing associated with it, because if you do that, guess what? When they click on the link, what are they going to do? They're not going to say a word. And so if you make an open environment to where it is celebrated, I mean, I don't know if you want to celebrate it, but let's use the term. If you celebrate the fact that, hey, the secretary clicked on the link, everybody, right? But that it's a learning experience for that person, and it's a learning experience for your security and IT staff. That's the way to handle that. Don't make it a, oh my gosh, kind of thing, or they won't tell you next time. It's more important to understand and respond to the incident than it is to get mad at the person who did that. Okay, last full slide that I've got for you. Web applications. Custom-built web applications, and this might not apply to all of you, but if you have or you build custom-based web applications, whether it's just a simple form where users come and sign up for something, this, in the education space, we see this a lot. Not so much custom applications anymore, which is good because Google Forms is awesome, right? And if you haven't converted people over to Google Forms, you should probably do that. But web applications that you're building in-house. Some of you build your own web servers, web platforms, login systems, dashboards, portals, all these different things. Any custom web application that we find is automatically a big target, because what we often find is when you have limited resources, which most web development firms do when they're internal to an organization, that common best coding practices are rarely followed. And so things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, and all of these things become a possibility, up to and including being able to download and dump entire databases of information, which has occurred. I mean, this isn't some hypothetical thing. Everything that we've talked about here has been a critical finding of one sort or another in every single one of the pen tests that we've done over the years. And in one case, we were able to dump an entire database of 30,000 records containing all of the information that you could possibly imagine. Web applications, if you're developing them in-house, make sure that secure coding practices are being adhered to. For those of you that are executives and administrators and leaders in the room, go back and ask these questions to your IT staff. If you're here with your IT staff guy and they're not in the same room, go ask like, hey, what are we doing about web application development? You know, do we use, and if you use the word secure coding practices, if you put those three words together and ask a security person those words, it's going to blow their mind, first of all. But ask them, are you doing these types of things? Is this happening within our organization, or are we just kind of blissfully unaware? Do we not know? So with that, those are the top X number, and I don't even know if we counted them, 12 things that we're finding in pen tests. There's so many other things that we find all the time. Security should be incremental. It should be something that we improve a little bit every single day, forever. I mean, it's a forever process, but if we do, it'll be effective. That's all I have. Thank you very much. Go get some lunch. And the first person that did ask a question to come up here and get this coin can have it. It's right here.